Yes, yes, get in! Ha ha ha! Hello peeps, it's Greendot 319. Welcome to another episode of Matt Stands Outside in the Winter and Gets Really Cold. What we're looking at today then is the top 5 ways that people are destroying their World War II Jeeps. Now, whether you have a Jeep or don't have a Jeep, or you want to have a Jeep in the future, always interesting to know about the little details about these things so that you can avoid the mistakes of others and you can make sure that your very expensive vehicle lasts for as long as it has. Now, I've just finished working on the 172,000 mile Jeep. To have a vehicle with so many miles for a vehicle which is only made to have survived a few thousand miles and maybe a couple of months is quite incredible. So I've been thinking about it and I've come up with a couple of ideas, 5 in fact, that will help you make your Jeep last for as long as his. Okay peeps, let's get this going. The first way you're destroying your World War II Jeep without knowing about it is lack of PM. Now, if you own a World War II Jeep and you don't know what PM was, well, there could be a bit of the problem. However, even if you don't know the acronym, you will know what PM is. It stands for Preventative Maintenance. Now, the World War II Jeep was designed very quickly in a short period of time, and it was designed to be rugged and basic. And because of that, a lot of the linkages in it are very rugged and basic. They don't have special lubrication or anything like that. They require you to look after it and lubricate it. Now, all this maintenance is really prescribed. It's written out in the manuals, the tech manuals, specifically Tech Manual 9803. So if you own one of these and you're not going through the TM 9803 and following the lubrication procedures, your Jeep is going to start to suffer. Now, in World War II, they tried to make all this lubrication very easy for us. They started off firstly by having a little bit of paper which had a lubrication chart on it, which went in the glove box, and you go through it and it shows you every single bit of the Jeep that needs to be lubricated. Now, later in the war, they decided that obviously a little bit of paper in a World War II Jeep is not a very good idea and it won't last very long. So they made it a little bit easier by sticking the lubrication chart underneath the hood so that it was easy to access and easy to find. Now, they obviously decided that people weren't following the lubrication chart enough, because then they put the lubrication gun, the grease gun, right next to the lubrication chart, so that it was very easy to find, as if that wasn't a subtle enough hint that you need to look after these vehicles. What do you mean I can't tell them to just read the manual? Of course I can. I keep on getting asked about it. No, yeah, you might think they've all thought about it, but honestly, I swear to God, I get asked it once every week. Yeah, the manual which comes with the Jeep, yeah, just follow it and grease it and it'll be fine. Yeah, okay, all right, well, let's move on now, let's move on. Okay peeps, the second way you're destroying your World War II Jeep without knowing about it is not allowing for sufficient engine warm-up time. Now, if it was World War II and we could go to the motor pool and get hold of another Jeep straight away, it wouldn't matter. We wouldn't need to worry about making sure this engine lasts as long as possible. But as you well know, these things are expensive and rare these days. We put a lot of time and effort into rebuilding them. We want our engine and our Jeep to last as long as possible. So we need to behave accordingly and look after it. And that involves allowing this cast iron engine time to warm up properly. Now, why is that important? Now, the thing is, when an engine is cold, everything inside it is contracted. The clearances inside of it are larger than they should be when it's at operating temperature. The other thing as well is just before it starts, the oil is cold and thick. When it's cold and thick, it can't flow very easily and it can't get all round the bearings into all the spaces it needs to go to. When the engine's been sitting as well, oil hasn't splashed around or sprayed around up into, say, the valve guides in areas which aren't directly lubricated, so there'll be metal-to-metal contact there straight away. So what does warming up mean then? Well, it's pretty straightforward really, actually, but it's not quite as straightforward as you think. Pull out the choke, get the Jeep started, get it revving to about 1500 to 1000 RPM straight away. Don't allow it to idle. What you want to do is you want that oil to be sprayed around inside there, to be getting moved around as quickly as possible. Allowing it to idle doesn't get the oil flow that we need straight away. We'll allow areas to not be properly lubricated and you'll get engine wear in there. What this doesn't mean is allow the engine to race. Don't pull it out to 3000 RPM and race the motor, because that will cause too much wear. So it's a sort of a balancing act between not racing the engine and not allowing it to idle. Let it run for a couple of minutes, allow a bit of oil temperature to appear on the oil gauge, and then drive it nice and gently. Don't go roaring straight off because the oil is still not warm. You can look here when we started up this Jeep this morning. To start off with, it takes quite a long time for any temperature to show whatsoever. The oil's temperature started off at about 40 degrees Fahrenheit or so. After 10 minutes of running, it's only at 90 degrees Fahrenheit, so even after 10 minutes of just above idling, it still hasn't properly warmed up yet. So if we went off and raced the Jeep straight away, we could be causing damage to it. So if you want to get as much life out of your World War II engine as possible and reduce the amount of time and the amount of cost you have in rebuilding costly Jeep engines, stick to my idea of allowing the Jeep to warm up. Don't just get in it and rat patrol it off straight away and start ragging it. It won't last very long at all. Yes. Yeah, I know it seems pretty basic, doesn't it? Allow the thing to warm up first before ragging it. Yeah, I know, but you wouldn't believe the number of people who do it. No, they'll be fine. They'll understand. Okay, right, let's move on. Okay, peeps, the third way you're destroying your World War II Jeep without not even knowing is not changing gear properly. Now, what am I talking about here? The World War II Jeep, as we know, is not a modern car, and you can't treat it as such. The number of times you're watching videos and you hear people grinding gears on these things, you could count on a million fingers if you had a million fingers. However, there's a proper way to treat this gearbox, to look after it. And as I've said, just like the engine, the gearboxes are damn expensive. You're looking at about $1,500 at least for a rebuild these days. If you spent all that money on your gearbox, the last thing you want to be doing is grinding gears. The other thing about grinding gears, of course, is you're making metal. So that metal is breaking off gear teeth, dropping down into the oil. Those bits of steel get stuck in those plain brass bearings and start to eat them out. It starts to destroy those bearings. You start to get movement in your cluster gear, and your gearbox wears out much quicker. So you want to prevent as much metal getting into that gearbox as possible, and that means avoiding grinding gears. Now, we're lucky with the T84, it has a synchro mesh on second and third gear, but it doesn't have a synchro mesh on first and reverse gear. So what that means then is you've got to treat first and reverse very carefully. Now, I have a policy when it comes to these gearboxes and first and reverse, and it's called tell, don't ask. No, hold on. Ask, don't tell, that's it. What that means is we're going to ask the gearbox that we can change gear. We're not going to tell it we're going to change gear. Now you're going to be thinking, what the hell does that mean? It's quite obvious actually, it's quite simple. What we do is you gently put pressure on the shifter cane before pushing it into gear. So you're asking it to change gear. You put the pressure on and you hold it there and you say, please Mr. Gearbox, will you change gear? Rather than telling the gearbox, we're changing gear now, and just pushing it in. And what happens is, as the speed gets matched to your synchro, or if you're not using the synchro gear, say first, as the gears wind down, the speed reduces as you slow down the vehicle. That pressure gently pushes against the gears. It doesn't grind them, but it's asking it, it's waiting for it to say, okay, now I'm at the right speed, I'll move into gear for you without grinding. So you're asking the gearbox to change gear. Now, for a long time, when it comes to changing from second to first gear, I've had a way of doing it, of just bringing the Jeep to a stop, having the clutch in, letting the gears all stop in the gearbox, and then slotting it into first. This prevents any grinding or any problems whatsoever. However, of course, when you're driving out on a highway or out on the main roads, this is not the best way of changing gear, because bringing a vehicle to a complete stop to change down into first causes lots of problems for the people behind you. Now, if you're very clever, you can double declutch from second down into first. It's not something I've been doing because I didn't want to cause any grinding in my gearbox while I practiced it. However, today I decided to take the plunge, and I've had a go at double declutching into the non-synchro meshed first gear. Let's have a look how I got on here. Right then, are you ready to try out the destroying gearbox method? Now, I can double declutch with second, of course, because it's got a synchro, but first I've been avoiding doing. So let's see how easy it is to do, okay? Now, I think you've got to rev pretty hard to get it to go in first, because the first ratio is pretty low. So here we go. Wish me luck. Braking. Yeah, that didn't work, did it? Right, we're going to try that again. I didn't rev hard enough. We can definitely get this to work. I've got to rev higher, okay? Let me concentrate. I won't talk for a second. I'll try and concentrate and actually properly double declutch here. Yeah, a little bit better. Not quite quick enough, and it still wasn't rev match. You could just hear that slight grind because I just hadn't got it quite high enough. I really need to hit that box, get that accelerator, and get those gears spin up. Okay, attempt 3. Let's try it again. Concentrate, Matt. We can do this. Coming in. Braking. Aha, I got it. With the postie. I was under stress there with the postie coming towards me, so I really blipped it and we got it in there. You see, we were still moving, we got it to work. So it does work, you just got to practice at it, and you've got to be brave enough to practice, especially if you've got an expensive gearbox in there. Okay, let's try one last final one and see how we do. Yes, yes, get in. Ha ha ha! Yes, nice. And another car coming towards us to force us in there. Yeah, you've got to really be aggressive with that blip. When you blip that throttle, you've got to really blip it. A half blip or something like that ain't going to work. Now, I'm going to be completely honest, peeps, that works much better than I'd anticipated, actually. And I don't know why I haven't been double declutching coming into first for a long time. Well, the reality was I didn't want to damage my gearbox practicing, really, but you got to take the plunge sometimes. So my recommendation then would be practice double declutching into first. It does seem to work quite well, but you've really got to hit that accelerator and get those gears spinning up. You've got to pad that thing and really match those gears, but does seem to work. So there we have it. That is the third way you're destroying your World War II Jeep without knowing about it. It's not doing proper gear changes in it and grinding its gears. Okay, peeps, the fourth way you're destroying your World War II Jeep without knowing about it is extended idling. Now, in America, apparently one of the things you like to do is parade Jeeps, which involves, I'm told, driving these things around quite slowly and often sitting for long periods of time with the vehicle idling. Now, unfortunately, the World War II Jeep is not designed to be sat idling for long periods of time or extended periods of time. The oil system in it is quite basic and quite straightforward, and it doesn't have direct lubrication everywhere. It relies on some splash and some spray lubrication. The other problem with idling as well is that incomplete combustion is occurring in the combustion chambers. Because the combustion inside the engine is not occurring at the proper temperature as well, you'll get carbon deposits building up which aren't getting burnt off, so your plugs will start to foul and you'll start to get soot and carbon build up inside your motor as well. These things are bad for the World War II Jeep engine, and they'll result in excessive wear. So what can you do about this? When I've been driving my Jeep around and it's got quite hot and my oil pressure's dropped down to say 10 psi, I want to make sure that oil is still circulating around that engine. So what I'll do is that if I pull up to say a set of traffic lights, the fortunate thing we have in the World War II Jeep is a hand throttle. So I'll just gently pull out the hand throttle so the engine's just up at a couple of, 1,000 RPM or something like that, and I can sit here happily. I've got 50 psi on the gauge at the moment, and I know that the engine is properly burning, the combustion is occurring a little bit hotter, it's burning off any deposits, that oil's getting all flung around inside the engine, it's getting up to where it needs to be, and my motor is not excessively wearing. So that's number 4. That's the fourth way you're destroying your World War II Jeep engine without knowing about it. It's allowing it to idle for long periods of time. Okay, peeps, it's time for number 5. You've got this far. My feet are pretty cold now. So we're gonna try and wrap this up. Now, this one's important actually, and that's why I've left it to the end. And the fifth way that you're destroying your World War II Jeep without knowing about it is when you're actually trying to be nice to it. Now, many people don't run their Jeeps during winter. They're not as stupid as me. They don't come outside and try and get the Battle of Bulge experience wearing a great coat and overshoes. No, they keep their Jeeps locked up for the winter inside a nice warm garage. Now, the thing is about this is the idea that occasionally you should start the Jeep up to prevent it deteriorating. This sounds like a very good idea on the face of it. And now it is a good idea on the face of it if you do it correctly, but many times it is done incorrectly. So let's look at that and how you can be damaging or destroying your Jeep engine without even knowing it. So what's the issue with this then? Well, the issue is that just starting your Jeep up for 5 minutes is not getting it up to the temperature that's required to do the protection that you're hoping it's going to do. So you've got 2 choices here. You've got one choice, which is to put it to bed completely for the winter and not touch it at all, which we're going to look at. Or the second choice is to get it out and get it properly up to temperature and then put it back to bed again. So you've got 2 options there. Let's look into both of them. So the first problem is then, if you just wake it up for 5 minutes, get it showing a little bit of temperature on the gauge and then put it to bed, what is the problem with this? Well, let me tell you. When your engine runs, it creates moisture inside of it. Now, when the inside of the engine is still cold, that moisture blow by, when the engine starts off, the pistons are not expanded, the piston rings are not expanded into the wall. When the combustion occurs inside the combustion chamber, moisture gets past the piston rings, go down into the crankcase, mixes with the oil. When that occurs, you get some very nasty things forming, some acidic things. When the cylinder walls and the inside of your engine are still cold, that hot, wet moisture air full of all sorts of nasty acidic stuff then sticks onto that, condenses onto that and stays on it. Now, if you only get it slightly warm, not warm enough to boil off or to get rid of all of that moisture and that vapor, 100 degrees centigrade, then all it does is condense and it stays there. And when you turn the engine off, it sits inside the engine on all those nice, shiny, clean metal parts and it attacks them and starts corroding them. This is less of a problem these days with modern oils. Modern oils know about this and they have things in them which prevent this acidic reactions and corrosion. However, it still does occur to a certain extent. And also, If we take away the idea of acidity completely, we just left with the idea of moisture. Moisture gets into your crankcase oil, mixes with it, and causes corrosion down inside your engine where you don't want it. So starting it up for 5 minutes, just running it, not getting it up to complete operating temperature, just temperature enough where you think, oh, it's had enough now, we'll turn it off, is not long enough. It will not get rid of all that moisture, and it is not good for your engine. Now, if you're questioning that, don't worry, I've already tested it out for you. This morning when I started this thing up, I ran it for 10 minutes, which is what I reckon is probably longer than most people run their Jeep in a garage for in winter, to see what temperature the oil got to. As you can see here, as we pulled out the dipstick, it's only about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The normal operating temperature of the oil should be about 180 to 210 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's well below its normal operating range. That's even with not racing the engine, but having the engine at a higher RPM. To get that temperature up, to get the engine really up to temperature, you actually have to take it out and drive it, which means you're going to be driving it in winter, which is probably something you want to avoid doing in the first place. So if you really don't want to take your Jeep out in winter and you want to put it away, what other choice do you have then? If you can't just get it up to temperature to get this moisture out of it, what can you do? Well, the other option then is to properly put it away for winter and properly seal it up so that it's ready for the next spring. So how can you do that then? Well, it's quite straightforward then. When it comes to the end of the season, when you've had enough of your Jeep, give it a clean, drain the oil out of it, load it up with some new oil, do the little bits of maintenance you need to do, then take it into your garage. Undo your spark plugs, spray some preservative oil down into the spark plugs, put them on gently back on top. Now, one of the things I would do then, which is what we're trying to avoid, is getting moisture inside the engine, is I would personally take the top off the carburetor, take off the elbow, and I'll get one of those desiccant bags, you know, those silica gel bags, make sure it's nicely sealed up so nothing can drop down, and I would put it in the top of the carburetor. That'll prevent any moisture which is in the manifold going into your valves or going around there and causing corrosion around the valve stems or anything like that. This is a real belt and braces thing here, but it's one way, if you don't want to get the Jeep out and you don't want to properly drive it in winter, it's one way to completely prevent any corrosion in it and any degradation of it. If you're really putting it away for winter, draining the fuel out of the fuel tank might be a good idea as well, especially if you're using ethanol fuel. This Jeep doesn't use ethanol fuel, it has 0 ethanol in it. However, if you do have ethanol in your fuel, I would recommend draining out your fuel tank, draining out your fuel filter, and just leaving it dry and sealed over winter. When it comes to spring and waking the Jeep up again, take the plugs out, spin it over on the starter so there's no resistance from the plugs, spin it over on the starter till you get oil pressure showing, put the plugs back in, and away you go, and you're ready for your next season of Jeep driving with no degradation over winter. Well, there you go, peeps. That's it. That's 5 ways you're destroying your World War II Jeep without knowing about it. If you knew about those ways already, congratulations. You should be subscribed to me already. You should be joining me on the Greendot 319 Facebook page. If you're not, of course, and you want to learn more, make sure that you are subscribed. Make sure you join me on Facebook as well, where we discuss and look at lots of little details when it comes to these amazing vehicles. But that's it for today. Join me in the future when my feet have thawed out again, and we'll get working on this. We've got more to do. We've got another Jeep coming in the future as well, another one to restore. So there's more stuff to play with, of course, as usual. But until then, keep on Jeeping and have a good Christmas. Cheers.